The apartment was quiet except for the soft sound of rain against the windows and the gentle hum of the heater. Ryan Stewart sat on the edge of the bed, his shoulders hunched forward as he stared at his hands folded in his lap. The dim light from the bedside lamp cast shadows across his face, highlighting the exhaustion that seemed to have settled into his bones over the past few weeks. His dark hair was disheveled, and there were circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. Charles Watson stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed over his chest. He had been watching Ryan for the past 10 minutes, studying the way his boyfriend's breathing seemed shallow and labored, the way he kept flexing his fingers as if trying to work out some invisible tension. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words and accumulated fears. Claudia, Ryan finally whispered, his voice barely audible above the rain. He didn't look up when he spoke, keeping his gaze fixed on his hands. I can't keep being a burden to you, Charles. It's not fair. The words hit Charles like a physical blow, causing him to straighten up from his casual position against the doorframe. His heart began to race as he processed what Ryan had just said, the implications settling over him like ice water. This was the conversation he had been dreading, the one he had seen building in Ryan's increasingly distant behavior over the past month. Charles asked, though he already knew. He had seen this coming in the way Ryan had stopped asking for help with simple tasks, the way he had started declining invitations to go out together, the way he had begun sleeping on the couch more often than in their shared bed. Ryan finally looked up, and Charles felt his breath catch at the pain he saw reflected in those familiar brown eyes. There was a resignation there that made Charles's chest tighten with panic, a kind of defeated acceptance that spoke of decisions already made. You know what I'm talking about, Ryan said softly. The appointments, the medications, the bad days when I can't even get out of bed, the way you have to rearrange your entire schedule around my doctor visits, the way you pretend it doesn't bother you when I have panic attacks in the middle of the night, the way you've had to become my caregiver instead of my partner. Charles felt something crack open inside his chest, a fissure of understanding that spread through him like lightning. This wasn't about Ryan not loving him anymore. This was about Ryan believing he was somehow damaging Charles's life by existing in it, by needing support and care during one of the most difficult periods of his life. Ryan, Charles said, pushing away from the doorframe and taking a step into the room. That's not how I see it at all. But Ryan shook his head, a bitter smile crossing his face. Of course that's not how you see it. You're too good a person to admit that having a boyfriend with chronic illness and anxiety is exhausting. You're too kind to tell me that you didn't sign up for this when we started dating 3 years ago. The rain outside seemed to intensify, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. Charles could hear the wind picking up, rattling the glass in its frames. The weather seemed to mirror the storm that was building inside their bedroom. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. This story is about to take you on an emotional journey that will remind you why love means staying, especially when things get difficult. Charles moved closer to the bed, his heart pounding as he tried to find the right words. The distance between them felt enormous, despite being only a few feet apart. Kudkayam, Charles said, his voice stared despite the chaos of emotions swirling inside him. Kudkayam, Ryan's hands stilled in his lap, and Charles could see him making an effort to focus, to be present for this conversation even though every instinct was probably telling him to flee. When you got sick 6 months ago, Charles had began, settling down on the bed next to Ryan but careful not to touch him yet. When the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong and you were in pain every day, do you know what my first thought was? Ryan shook his head. My first thought was that I was grateful I was here. Not grateful that you were sick, but grateful that you didn't have to go through it alone. Grateful that I could be the person who drove you to appointments and held your hand in waiting rooms and made sure you ate something even when you felt too nauseous to want food. Charles paused, watching as Ryan's breathing became slightly more even. The bedside lamp cast a warm circle of light around them, creating an intimate space that felt separate from the storm outside. Charles continued, Code 14. Ryan's head snapped up at that, his eyes wide with surprise. A privilege? Yes, Charles said firmly. Do you remember when we first started dating and you told me about your ex, Nathan? How he used to make you feel like you were too needy, Too emotional, too much work to be worth loving. Ryan nodded slowly. Nathan Collins had been a significant presence in Ryan's life for 2 years, a relationship that had left deep scars in the form of self-doubt and a persistent belief that love was conditional. Code 18. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, but inside their bedroom the atmosphere was beginning to shift. Some of the heavy despair that had been hanging over them was starting to lift. Quote 19, Charles said, reaching out slowly to take one of Ryan's hands in his own, relieved when Ryan didn't pull away. Quote 20, Ryan's fingers tightened around Charles's hand, and Charles could feel some of the tension beginning to release. Quote Juan, Ryan said quietly. Quote Tanal, Charles felt a flash of anger, not at Ryan, but at the friends who had made him feel judged for prioritizing his relationship. Quote 23, Charles said. Quote 24, he shifted on the bed so he was facing Ryan more directly, their knees touching now. The lamplight caught the flecks of gold in Ryan's brown eyes. Do you remember our second date? Charles asked. When you had that panic attack in the restaurant and you were so embarrassed that you wanted to leave immediately? Ryan's mouth curved into a small smile. Quote 27, quote Burton. Charles could see tears gathering in Ryan's eyes, but they looked different from the tears of despair he had been shedding earlier. I just feel so guilty, Ryan whispered. I feel like I've stolen your life from you. Like you should be with someone who can give you adventures and spontaneous trips and easy, uncomplicated love. Ryan, Charles said, his voice gentle but firm. Look at me. Ryan raised his eyes to meet Charles's gaze. The words seemed to wash over Ryan like a wave, and Charles could see him struggling to process them, to believe them. Quote 36. Ryan asked. Quote 37. Charles couldn't help but smile at that. Ryan, my goal has always been to build a life with someone I love. My dream has always been to find a partner who I could support and who would support me through whatever life throws at us. Everything else is just details. The rain outside was beginning to soften, no longer the urgent drumming it had been earlier, but a gentler, more rhythmic sound. The wind had died down too, and the bedroom felt calmer, more peaceful. I've been thinking about leaving, Ryan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Not just ending our relationship, but actually leaving the city, going back to my parents' house or finding some small town where I could disappear and not be anyone's problem anymore. The confession hit Charles like a punch to the gut. The idea of Ryan disappearing, of waking up one day to find him gone without a trace, was more terrifying than anything Charles had ever contemplated. You would have left without talking to me first? Charles asked, trying to keep the hurt out of his voice. I thought it would be easier for you, Ryan said, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. I thought if I just disappeared, you could tell people that I was the one who left, that I was the one who couldn't handle the relationship. Charles felt his own eyes fill with tears at the depth of pain Ryan's plan revealed. The idea that Ryan had been carrying this burden alone was almost unbearable, Charles said, his voice breaking slightly. Quote Avamrapante. Ryan was crying openly now, his shoulders shaking. Charles moved closer on the bed, wrapping his arms around Ryan and pulling him against his chest. Ryan sobbed into Charles's shirt. I'm so tired of fighting my own brain every day. I'm so tired of feeling like I'm drowning and dragging you down with me. I know, Charles murmured, running his fingers through Ryan's hair. Quote 49, they sat like that for several minutes, Ryan crying against Charles's chest while Charles held him and whispered reassurances. Do you remember what you told me when I was going through that rough patch at work last year? Charles asked when Ryan's sobs had quieted. Quote 51, Ryan pulled back slightly to look at Charles. Quote on, or quote on, quote on. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Quote on, quote on, Charles said firmly. Quote Ryan. Charles could see Ryan struggling with this concept, his logical mind warring with the emotional beliefs that had been shaped by past relationships. Quote 59. Charles continued. Quote 61. Ryan's breath hitched at that, surprise flickering across his face. You think you're lucky to be with me? Ryan asked, his voice small. I know I'm lucky to be with you, Charles corrected. Ryan, you're the most compassionate person I've ever met. You remember everyone's birthdays and send thoughtful messages when people are going through difficult times. You volunteer at the animal shelter even when you're having your own bad days because you know the dogs need attention. Charles paused, watching as Ryan's expression grew more and more amazed. Well, but Carter quotes out that Ryan protested weakly. Quote say, the room had grown quieter as they talked, the storm outside finally beginning to pass. The bedside lamp cast a warm, steady glow over them, creating an intimate circle of light. Charles said, shifting slightly so he could look directly into Ryan's eyes. And I need you to really hear me. Ryan nodded, wiping his eyes and making a visible effort to focus completely on Charles's words. Quotes added, Charles's voice grew thick with emotion as he remembered those early days of Ryan's illness. The countless doctor visits and inconclusive tests. Quote 70, Ryan was staring at him with wide eyes. Quote 71, Charles continued. Quote 72, quote 70, Ryan whispered. Quote 7, Charles could see that Ryan was struggling not to cry again. Quote 70 feet, Ryan said softly. Quote, the truth of Charles's words seemed to settle over Ryan like a warm blanket. I've been so scared, Ryan admitted. I've been so scared that one day you would wake up and realize that this isn't what you signed up for. Ryan, Charles said gently, what do you think a normal relationship looks like? Ryan was quiet for a moment. I guess I thought it would be two healthy people who support each other through temporary problems, but don't have ongoing issues. Do you know anyone who has a relationship like that? Ryan frowned, clearly thinking through the couples they knew. Well, Ashley and her husband seem pretty stable, but he did have that cancer scare last year. And Christina and her wife are happy, but Christina has been dealing with her mother's dementia. What about Mary and her partner? Mary's been struggling with postpartum depression, and her partner has been essentially a single parent for months while Mary gets treatment. Charles nodded. So it sounds like every couple we know is dealing with some kind of ongoing challenge. The realization seemed to dawn on Ryan slowly. I guess I never thought about it that way, he said. I guess I thought everyone else had it figured out and we were the only ones struggling. That's because people don't usually talk openly about the difficult parts of their relationships. They post about vacations and anniversaries, which gives everyone else the impression that their love is effortless. Charles reached out to cup Ryan's face in his hands. Quote to quote Ryan said quietly. Quote to Eastern, quote to Han. Ryan's eyes widened. Oh God, I have been doing that, haven't I? I've been so convinced that you must be miserable that I haven't been paying attention to what you've actually been telling me. You've been listening to your anxiety instead of listening to me. And I understand why, because anxiety is loud and persistent. But anxiety is also a liar, Ryan. It takes our worst fears and presents them as inevitable facts. Charles could see Ryan processing this, his expression cycling through various emotions as he worked through months of accumulated guilt and self-doubt. So when I've been pulling away and sleeping on the couch and trying to make myself smaller, Ryan said slowly, I haven't been protecting you. I've been hurting you. You've been hurting both of us, Charles confirmed gently, because you've been depriving me of the closeness that I want with you. And you've been depriving yourself of the support and love that you need and deserve. Ryan closed his eyes, working through the implications of this realization. When he opened his eyes again, they were clearer than they had been all evening. I don't know how to stop being afraid, Ryan said honestly. I don't know how to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. You don't have to stop being afraid all at once, Charles said. Fear like that doesn't disappear overnight. But you can start by choosing to trust me when I tell you how I feel about you. You can start by believing that I'm capable of making my own decisions about what I want in my life. How do I do that? How do I choose to trust when my brain is constantly telling me, Emma, you're just being nice? Charles considered this carefully. I think it starts with communication. Instead of assuming you know what I'm thinking, you ask me directly. Instead of making decisions about our relationship based on your fears, you talk to me about those fears so we can address them together. Like tonight? Exactly like tonight. When you told me you were thinking about leaving, it gave me the opportunity to tell you how I really feel. If you had just disappeared, I never would have had the chance to explain that taking care of you isn't a burden for me. Ryan nodded slowly. What if I have days when I can't believe you? What if my anxiety gets really bad and I start spiraling again? Then you tell me that's what's happening, and I'll remind you, as many times as you need to hear it, That's what partners do for each other, Ryan. We help each other remember the truth when our brains are telling us lies. The simplicity of this concept seemed to surprise Ryan. It's really that simple? The concept is simple. The execution might be more challenging, especially at first. But yes, it really can be that simple. When you're feeling like a burden, you tell me, and I remind you that you're not. When you're feeling unworthy of love, you tell me, and I remind you of all the reasons why you are worthy. Charles could see tears forming in Ryan's eyes again, but these were different from the tears of despair. These looked like tears of hope. Quote 112, Ryan said, shaking his head in amazement. Quote 103, Ryan was quiet for a long moment, working through everything they had discussed. Quote 114, Ryan said finally, his voice stronger than it had been all evening, and quote 115, quote 116, quote 117. Charles appreciated the directness of the question. Quote 118, he said without hesitation. Quote 119. Ryan's expression grew tense as Charles spoke. But, Charles continued quickly, feeling frustrated or overwhelmed sometimes doesn't mean I regret being with you or that I want to leave. It means I'm human. The important thing is that even on the days when I feel frustrated, I never doubt that I want to be here with you, working through these challenges together. The tension in Ryan's face began to ease. Quote on two. Charles added, quote one. Ryan's eyes filled with tears of understanding. Thank you for being honest with me, Ryan said softly. I think I needed to hear that it's okay for this to be hard sometimes, as long as it's not so hard that you want to give up. It's absolutely okay for this to be hard sometimes. Any relationship worth having is going to be challenging at times. The difference between a relationship that lasts and one that doesn't isn't whether or not you face difficulties together. It's whether or not you're both committed to working through those difficulties as a team. Charles could see that Ryan was beginning to look tired, but it was a different kind of tiredness than the exhausted despair he had been carrying earlier. This looked more like peaceful tiredness. I think I'm ready to come back to bed, Ryan said quietly. I mean, to sleep in our bed again instead of on the couch, if that's okay with you. Charles felt his heart swell with relief. Ryan's decision to sleep on the couch had been one of the most painful aspects of the past few weeks. Ryan admitted, quote 131, quote 32, Charles asked, quote 32. The honesty in Ryan's voice was breathtaking. I can absolutely give you all of those things, Charles said, reaching out to take Ryan's hands. Quote 45. They sat there for a moment, hands intertwined, looking at each other with a new understanding. Wadafiyanin, Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Quote 130, quote 130. Charles replied, bringing one of Ryan's hands to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to his knuckles. I love you for your compassion and your strength and your willingness to keep trying even when things get difficult. The rain outside had stopped completely now, leaving behind a peaceful silence. The bedroom felt warm and safe. I want to make you a promise, Charles said, his voice serious. I promise that if I ever start to feel overwhelmed or like I need more support in our relationship, I will talk to you about it directly instead of letting it build up. And I promise that I will never make you feel like your needs are a burden to me. I want to make you a promise too, Ryan said. I promise that I will try to trust you when you tell me how you feel about me, even when my anxiety is telling me otherwise. And I promise that I will talk to you about my fears instead of making decisions based on assumptions. They sealed these promises with a kiss, soft and tender and full of renewed commitment. When they pulled apart, Charles could see that some fundamental shift had occurred in Ryan's demeanor. Charles asked, Ryan said, then hesitated. Quote 146, quote 147. Ryan nodded, looking reassured. They got ready for bed together, moving around each other in the bathroom with a natural ease that had been missing for weeks. When they climbed into bed together, Ryan immediately moved closer to Charles, curling up against his side with his head on Charles's chest. Charles, Ryan said softly into the darkness. Yeah? Thank you for not letting me leave. Thank you for fighting for us when I was too scared to fight for myself. Thank you for staying. Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me what you were really thinking instead of just disappearing. They lay there in comfortable silence, listening to each other breathe. The bedroom was peaceful now, all traces of the earlier emotional storm having been replaced by calm and renewed connection. I think I'm going to call Dr. Martinez tomorrow, Ryan said eventually. I want to talk to her about what happened tonight. Charles felt proud of Ryan for recognizing that he might benefit from professional support. I think that's a great idea. And if you want, I could come with you to an appointment sometime. You would do that? Of course I would do that. I told you I want to understand your world so I can be a meaningful part of it. Ryan relaxed even further into their embrace. I feel like such an idiot for thinking you would be better off without me, Ryan said with a self-deprecating laugh. You're not an idiot, Charles said firmly. You were in pain, and your brain was trying to protect you in the only way it knew how. Still, I'm glad you stopped me. I'm glad you made me stay and talk about it. I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you were bum enough to tell me what you were really thinking. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other in the warm circle of lamplight, both feeling more secure and connected than they had in months. The storm outside had passed completely, leaving behind a clear, starlit sky. When Ryan woke up the next morning, his first thought was not the usual spiral of anxiety that had been plaguing him for weeks. Instead, he found himself focusing on the feeling of Charles's arms around him, the steady sound of his breathing. For the first time in months, Ryan felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Charles stirred as Ryan shifted slightly, immediately tightening his embrace. Coat 162, Charles murmured against Ryan's neck. Good morning, Ryan replied, turning in Charles's arms so they were facing each other. To one city, quote Wasserman, quote account, Charles smiled, reaching out to brush a strand of hair away from Ryan's forehead. You deserve to be here. You deserve to be loved and cared for and held. Ryan felt tears prick at his eyes, but they were good tears. I'm going to try to remember that, he said. And when I forget, I'm going to ask you to remind me instead of assuming you're just being polite. Deal, Charles said, leaning in to kiss Ryan softly. What do you want to do today? Ryan considered this, realizing that for the first time in months, he felt capable of making plans. I want to make you breakfast, he said. I want to sit at our table and drink coffee with you and talk about normal things. I want to have a regular Saturday morning with my boyfriend. Charles's face lit up with joy. He spent the morning doing exactly that, moving around their kitchen together with an ease that felt both familiar and new. Ryan made pancakes while Charles brewed debriefing, and they talked about weekend plans and whether they should finally replace the broken lamp in the living room. It was wonderfully ordinary, the kind of simple domestic happiness that Ryan had been afraid he would never feel again. As they sat at their kitchen table, sharing breakfast, Ryan realized that he had learned something important the night before. He had learned that being loved didn't require being perfect, that real love was big enough to hold space for struggle and illness and fear. Charles, Ryan said, reaching across the table to take his boyfriend's hand. The 176, quote woman. Charles squeezed Ryan's hand. I'm really glad you let me. Outside their kitchen window, the sun was shining brightly, all traces of the previous night's storm having been washed away. It felt like a new beginning for their relationship and for Ryan's understanding of his own worth. They spent the rest of the day together, running errands and watching movies, and simply enjoying each other's company without the weight of unspoken fears hanging over them. That evening, as they were getting ready for bed again, Ryan felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. For a moment, the old fears tried to reassert themselves, whispering that Charles was only being nice, that Ryan was fooling himself. But instead of spiraling, Ryan remembered the promise he had made. He took a deep breath and turned to Charles. Quote 179. Ryan said, his voice slightly shaky but determined. Quote, Waity? Charles immediately stopped what he was doing and turned to face Ryan. Quote, Witpanawan, he said. Quote, the simple directness of Charles's response was exactly what Ryan needed. The anxious thoughts didn't disappear completely, but they lost their power over him. Quote, 23. Ryan said, feeling his breathing return to normal. Quote, and as they settled into bed together for the second night in a row, Ryan marveled at how different he felt. The change wasn't magical or complete. He knew his anxiety and health issues weren't going to disappear overnight, but something fundamental had shifted. He had learned that love wasn't something you had to earn through perfect behavior. He had learned that being vulnerable and needing support didn't make him weak. He had learned that the right person would see his struggles as part of who he was rather than as obstacles to loving him. Most importantly, he had learned that he didn't have to face his challenges alone. He had a partner who was committed to walking through life with him, supporting him through difficult times and celebrating with him during good ones. As Charles's arms tightened around him and he felt himself drifting off to sleep, Ryan realized that he was no longer afraid of being a burden. He was no longer planning escape routes or preparing for inevitable abandonment. Instead, he was looking forward to tomorrow, to building a life with someone who loved him, not in spite of his imperfections, but because of the complete, complex, beautifully human person he was. 3 months later, Ryan found himself thinking about that night often, especially during his therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez. They had spent considerable time unpacking the beliefs that had led him to nearly sabotage the most important relationship in his life, and Ryan had made significant progress. The work wasn't easy, and there were still days when his anxiety tried to convince him that he was too much trouble. But now he had tools to combat those thoughts, and more importantly, he had a partner who was committed to helping him remember the truth when his brain was telling him lies. Charles had come to several therapy sessions with him, not to speak for Ryan, but simply to better understand how he could be supportive. Dr. Martinez had helped them develop communication strategies and had validated what Charles had told Ryan that night, that caring for someone you love during difficult times isn't a burden, but a natural expression of love. Their relationship had grown stronger in the months following that difficult conversation. They had learned to talk more openly about their fears and needs, to ask for support when they needed it, and to celebrate small victories. Ryan's health had stabilized somewhat, but more importantly, he had stopped seeing his illness as something that made him unworthy of love. Charles had also grown from the experience, learning to be more direct about his own needs instead of trying to be the perfect caregiver. He had started attending his own therapy sessions and had developed a better understanding of the difference between supporting someone and trying to fix them. On this particular evening, exactly 3 months after the night Ryan had almost left, they were sitting on their couch together watching a movie. Ryan was curled up against Charles's side, feeling completely content and secure. Quote 186, Ryan said during a quiet moment in the film. Quote, what do we seven? Quote, one in Charles was quiet for a moment. Quote, Odanese, he said honestly. Quote, Winda. Quote, Anoi, quote, I do. Ryan lifted his head to look at Charles, struck by the sincerity in his voice. Quote, 183, Ryan said. Quote, Washifterni, quote, Sivini, quote, Yandao. Charles smiled, leaning down to press a kiss to the top of Ryan's head. I'm proud of us too, he said. I'm proud of how far we've come and how much we've learned about each other and about ourselves. They settled back into comfortable silence, returning their attention to the movie while remaining aware of each other's presence. Ryan felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this simple moment, for the ordinary miracle of being loved and loving someone in return. As the credits rolled, Ryan realized that he had something he wanted to say. Quote, one night, he said, sitting up so he could look directly at his boyfriend. Quote to husband, quote to on, and Charles nodded, remembering how difficult it had been for Ryan to accept that perspective. Quote to Tarian, Ryan continued. Quote, Tarian, Charles's eyes filled with tears, deeply moved by this declaration. I used to think that love was about finding someone who wouldn't be too much trouble, Ryan said. But I've learned that real love isn't about finding someone who's easy to love. It's about finding someone who's worth the effort, someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself. Ryan, Charles said softly. You make me want to be brave, Ryan continued. You make me want to fight for my health and my happiness and our relationship instead of just giving up when things get difficult. You make me want to believe that I'm worthy of love and care and all the good things that life has to offer. Charles reached out to cup Ryan's face in his hands. Quote 210, he said. Quote 211. They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of 3 months' worth of growth and healing and renewed commitment. When they pulled apart, Ryan felt that same sense of rightness that he had experienced on that difficult night months earlier. I love you, Ryan said simply. I love you too, Charles replied. All of you, including the parts that need care and support and patience, especially those parts, because they've taught me what real love actually looks like. As they prepared for bed that night, Ryan reflected on how much his life had changed since that evening when he had been prepared to walk away from everything good in his world. He thought about the conversation that had saved his relationship and possibly his life. The moment when Charles had looked him in the eyes and told him that being loved didn't require being easy to love. He thought about all the small moments of growth and healing that had followed, the therapy sessions and difficult conversations and gradual rebuilding of trust. He thought about the way Charles had shown up for him consistently, proving over and over again that his love was real and lasting and unconditional. Most of all, he thought about the future they were building together, a future that included space for both of their imperfections and struggles and needs. A future built on the understanding that love wasn't about finding someone who would never be difficult to love, but about finding someone worth loving even when it was difficult. As they settled into bed together, Ryan felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. He was no longer afraid of being a burden because he had learned that the right person would never see him that way. He was no longer afraid of needing support because he had learned that asking for help was a sign of strength rather than weakness. Charles, Ryan said softly in the darkness. Yeah, thank you for making me stay that night. Thank you for not letting me disappear. Thank you for staying. Thank you for trusting me enough to let me love you. They fell asleep holding each other, both secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious and worth fighting for. They had found a love that was big enough to hold space for struggle and growth and imperfection. A love that made them both braver and stronger than they had ever been alone. Outside their bedroom window, the city continued its nightly rhythm, full of other people navigating their own relationships and challenges. But inside their small apartment, Ryan and Charles had created a sanctuary of acceptance and tone, understanding, and unconditional love. A place where being human in all its messy complexity was not only accepted, but celebrated. The next morning brought new challenges and opportunities, as all mornings do. Ryan's anxiety would still flare up sometimes, and Charles would still feel overwhelmed by the weight of caring for someone he loved during difficult times. They would still have disagreements and days when everything felt harder than it should be. But they would face all of it together, armed with the knowledge that love was not a limited resource that could be used up, but an inexhaustible well that grew deeper with each act of care and support. They had learned that the most beautiful love stories weren't about perfect people finding each other, but about imperfect people choosing to grow and heal and build something lasting together. Ryan had learned that he didn't have to earn love through perfect behavior, that his worth as a human being wasn't determined by how easy he was to love. He had learned that the right person would see his struggles as part of his story rather than as obstacles to loving him. Charles had learned that supporting someone through difficult times wasn't a burden to be endured, but a privilege to be embraced. That love was most meaningful when it was tested and chose to remain anyway. He had learned that being a good partner meant showing up consistently and choosing love even when it required sacrifice and patience. Together they had learned that real love wasn't about finding someone who would never need care or support, but about finding someone worth caring for and supporting. They had learned that the strongest relationships were built not on the absence of challenges, but on the commitment to face those challenges together. As the months and years passed, Ryan and Charles would continue to grow both individually and as a couple. They would face new challenges and celebrate new victories, always with the knowledge that they had chosen each other, not in spite of their imperfections, but because of their complete, complex, beautifully human selves. Their love story wasn't perfect or easy, but it was real and lasting, and built on a foundation of acceptance that would sustain them through whatever life brought their way. It was a love story that proved that sometimes the most beautiful relationships are the ones that require the most courage, the most growth, and the most willingness to choose love, even when it's challenging. Years later, when friends asked them about the secret to their lasting relationship, Ryan and Charles would always come back to that night when everything almost fell apart, but didn't. They would talk about the importance of communication and vulnerability and choosing each other even when it's scary. They would talk about how real love isn't about finding someone who will never need support, but about finding someone worth supporting through anything. Ryan would often speak at support groups for people with chronic illness, sharing a story about how he had almost thrown away the love of his life, because he believed he was too much trouble to be worth loving. He would talk about the lies that anxiety tells and the importance of asking for reassurance instead of making assumptions. Charles would sometimes join him at these speaking engagements, talking about the privilege of caring for someone you love and the way that supporting a partner through difficult times had actually strengthened their relationship rather than weakening it. Together, Together, they would tell their story as a reminder that love could survive anything when both people were committed to choosing each other, to communicating openly, and to believing that they were worthy of being loved exactly as they were. Their apartment became a gathering place for friends who were navigating their own relationship challenges, a safe space where people could talk openly about the difficulties of loving and being loved without judgment. On the anniversary of that difficult night each year, they would have a quiet celebration, not of the crisis itself, but of their decision to choose each other and work through their problems together. They would talk about how far they had come and set intentions for the year ahead. Ryan's health continued to be a factor in their lives, requiring ongoing management and occasional adjustments to their plans. But it was no longer a source of shame or fear. Instead, it had become simply one aspect of their life together, no more defining than any other element of their complex relationship. They had learned to find joy in small moments and to celebrate victories that might seem insignificant to others but were meaningful to them. A day when Ryan felt well enough to take a long walk together. A week when Charles could focus on his own projects without worrying. A month when they could travel together without having to pack extra medications. But they had also learned to find meaning and connection even during the difficult times. They had learned that love wasn't diminished by struggle, but was actually made stronger by weathering storms together. Their friends often commented on the depth of their connection, the way they seemed to understand each other without words. What their friends didn't always see was the work that went into maintaining that connection, the daily choices to communicate openly and choose love even when it was challenging. Ryan and Charles had learned that the fairy tale version of love was not only unrealistic, but actually less meaningful than the kind of love they had built together. Their love had been tested and had chosen to remain. It had been challenged and had grown stronger. As they grew older together, they would face new challenges and changes. There would be career transitions and family crises and health scares and all the ordinary difficulties that life brings. But they would face all of it with the confidence that came from knowing they had already survived their darkest moment and come out stronger. They would face it with the knowledge that love wasn't about finding someone who would never be difficult to love, but about finding someone worth loving even when it was difficult. They would face it with the understanding that the strongest relationships were built not on the absence of problems, but on the commitment to solve problems together. Most importantly, they would face it with the certainty that they had chosen well when they chose each other, that they had found something rare and precious and worth fighting for. They would face it knowing that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that almost ended before they really began. And in quiet moments, when they were sitting together or lying in bed or simply existing in each other's presence, they would remember that night when Ryan had been prepared to disappear rather than continue being what he thought was a burden. They would remember how Charles had refused to let him go, how he had fought for their relationship when Ryan was too scared to fight for himself. They would remember the conversation that had changed everything, the moment when they had chosen honesty over fear and love over self-protection. They would remember how it felt to realize that they were both exactly where they belonged, with exactly the right person, building exactly the kind of love that could last a lifetime. In the end, their story became a testament to the power of staying when everything inside you is telling you to go, to the courage required to believe that you are worthy of love even when you feel like a burden, and to the transformative power of choosing someone and being chosen in return. It became a reminder that the most beautiful love stories are often the ones that require the most bravery, the most growth, and the most faith in the possibility of building something lasting and meaningful together. Ryan never again questioned whether he deserved Charles's love. And Charles never regretted choosing to fight for their relationship when it would have been easier to let Ryan walk away. They had learned that real love wasn't about finding someone who would never need support, but about finding someone worth supporting through anything. They had learned that the strongest love was the kind that said, stay, when everything else was saying go on. And as they continued to build their life together, year after year, they carried with them the knowledge that they had found something truly extraordinary. A love that was big enough to hold space for imperfection and struggle and growth. A love that made them both braver and stronger and more themselves than they had ever been alone. They had found the kind of love that proves that sometimes the most frightening conversations lead to the most beautiful discoveries, and that sometimes the most important word you can say to someone is simply stay.